This is Market Pathways, your premium guide to global medical device regulation, reimbursement, and policy. Become a part of the global Medtech community at mystrategist.com.
So I'm Steve Levin, and with my colleague Dave Filmore from Market Pathways, I want to welcome everyone to another edition of our Market Pathways podcast. And today's edition is a post-election wrap-up, and we're really fortunate to have with us Mark Leahey from MDMA and Crist from Advamed. I can't think of two people who really have spent more time focusing. I assume you guys got a little bit of rest after the election, especially since things dragged on after Election Day, but it must have been pretty hectic. And the real theme of this podcast is to talk about the impact of the election on the medtech industry and talk about both Senate and House and also key legislative priorities that we might look to see both in the end of this year and as we open up the new Congress in 2023. So, Dave, with that, let me kind of turn it over to you if you have any introductory remarks, and then we can kind of dive right in.
Well, it's not a debate or anything. We don't need equal time, but I appreciate it, Steve. Yeah, Dave Filmore, I'm editor of Market Pathways. Nice to have you, Mark and Greg. But yeah, I think, it's a divided Congress. And you want me to chime in with the first question there, Steve, or do you got
Sure, go right ahead.
Yeah, I mean, look, we obviously people have heard the results. Senate remains in the hands of the Democrats. House, Republicans will have a slim margin still to be determined exactly what. And, we, as said, we got split power in Washington, not necessarily a completely unusual thing, but, what are your guys' top line take? We'll dig into some details. What does this make you feel like? I don't know, Greg, you want to give a start first, then we'll go from there.
Yeah. And first of all, thank you for having us. It's always good to talk and certainly to read your pubs. A few takeaways. One, I mean, we headed into this decade understanding, if you looked at the 80s, the 90s, shifts in power occurred 2-3 times over these decades, the 80s and the 90s. And we hit the 2020s or even the 2010, and there was a shift 9 times in power, whether it's the White House, House or Senate, 9 times since 2000. So I think what you're seeing here is a pattern of majority shifts moving forward. Let that be sort of the rule as opposed to the exception, which I think our industry has done a nice job in adapting because we've never taken a partisan edge. I know, Mark, you would agree with that. Tried to remain nonpartisan, bipartisan. And if you think about the medical device tax, that occurred in a divided government. Even when many thought, typically traditionally pro tax cut Republicans, when they held all the levers, it didn't get done. And so that's an interesting marker. I'll say this about the election. I think the 2 takeaways for me are candidate quality matters and the base shows up. And if you wanted to add a corollary to the base shows up, some of the analyses, and we can do this all day, right? But some of the analysis was voters weren't quite willing coming out of a Trump era, however you shake it out. I mean, it left a taste in the mouths of voters, and they weren't quite ready to turn it completely over to the Republicans again. I heard that a lot. It's qualitative thought, but it was one that really stood out to me. So the base shows up and candidate quality matters. And I think those are the 2 top lines from my perspective.
Louis, also, and before Mark you chime in, Greg, let me just add to that to ask you, since we didn't talk with either of you before the election, you have carte blanche now to answer, were the results consistent with your expectations, or were both of you surprised by anything?
Go ahead, Mark.
You can chime in, and then Mark, you want to chime in?
Oh, okay. Well, I'll say no. I'll say no. I had the House at at 30 seats. Not a 30-seat majority, but a 30-seat flip.
Right.
And I felt like, so I subscribed to the wave. I felt like Hassan would hang on, but I felt like I knew a lot of folks on the ground in Pennsylvania. I thought Oz was going to get that. I won't be surprised if Warnock keeps his seat in Georgia. So I was surprised. I had the Republicans in the Senate majority with a 1-seat advantage.
Mark?
Yeah, again, I'd start off, thanks to Steve and Dave. Good to see you, Greg, as well. A couple of things, Steve, you said at the outset, have we gotten any rest? Well, as you know, the elections aren't over. We still have 4 seats uncalled in the House. We have a runoff in Georgia coming up December 6th. So this is no longer election day. It's election month and beyond. And I think my big takeaway is we have a divided country. You really do have kind of the both sides kind of dug in, and independents here. I think most thought, because of the economic headwinds, inflation, et cetera, that independents would break more towards Republicans, and that would move towards a Democrat, kind of a Republican wave. But that obviously didn't turn out to be the case. I think a lot of the exit poll data and polling showed that the Dobbs decision did impact folks. And I also think, again, when you look, particularly the last month or so, when you look more in the data, but this is when Trump kind of stuck his head out a little bit more. He was doing rallies. He did that head fake tease towards his eventual announcements of running again. And I think that got a lot of, Greg mentioned the base. I think there were a lot of dissatisfied Democratic-based voters who didn't feel like, with Democrats controlling the House, the Senate, and the White House, they delivered on key promises around immigration or others. But all of a sudden, the greatest catalyst for the Democratic base was the prospect of Trump coming back. And so I think, that I think was a material shift in the landscape over the closing weeks here that mattered. And again, I think, as Greg alluded to, the candidate quality, you can't understate that. And, Democrats played a very risky, but crafty and ultimately successful strategy where they went and put money in to bolster the more MAGA Republican candidates in the primary. And that allowed them a much easier path to victory in the general. And so I think all of these things, came together and resulted in the election that we have. But again, as was stated, we've always had the good fortune. I'm coming up on my 21st year at MDMA and having the pleasure of representing this industry. And we have worked tirelessly when, regardless of what the political landscape looks like, it's focused on, impact on patient care, promoting innovation, domestic manufacturing. And I think, that's a tried and true message, and it's important for Republicans, Democrats, Independents, and will continue in that fashion, for the next Congress and beyond.
That's a good overview. And let me dig into the Senate, and then Dave, I'll turn it over to you to talk about the House. So let me approach the Senate from, again, we're talking from a medtech industry perspective. Probably the most significant change in a lot of people's mind is the change in leadership at the Help Committee. So the likelihood, and again, not set in stone, but likely, with Patty Murray moving over to chair appropriations, that Bernie Sanders is going to be the chairman, and Bill Cassidy of Louisiana ranking member. I highlight that committee because that's the one committee that probably has the greatest impact potentially on issues that can affect MedTech. So let's kind of start out there. And Mark, let me start with you. Any perspective on whether you see any likely change in priorities with Senator Sanders taking over the leadership of the committee? And again, Senator Cassidy's a physician. He's exhibited interest on various life science related issues in the past. Do you see the priorities shifting at all for the Help Committee, specifically as regards to the medical device industry?
Sure. Well, obviously, as you noted, Senator Burr, a long history in serving both the House and the Senate, is retiring. We appreciate his leadership on so many issues. And with Senator Murray moving, like the appropriations, Bernie Sanders and Dr. Cassidy. And I think, again, from our perspective, and help oversees a lot of health issues, particularly the FDA. With the MDUFA and all the UFA reauthorizations occurring this past fall, obviously significant investment from the industry, additional commitments being made by the agency, I suspect that there'll be a strong interest in ensuring that those commitments are met, and there's additional oversight of FDA and other agencies under health's purview. As it relates to priorities of potentially Chairman Sanders, he's been outspoken about Medicare for all, drug pricing, et cetera. Hasn't been really, I think, engaged in anything that's device specific, specific to our industry. Obviously, Medicare for all would have an impact on the device space. And I think with Dr. Cassidy, he showed, he's grew up as a Democrat, again, physician, understands delivering healthcare. I think someone who is definitely well-versed and likes to get into the weeds in particular issues, and has a strong record of working in a bipartisan fashion. And so, again, when we look out on the horizon, whether it's during the lame duck or in next Congress, you can see, pandemic response, mental health. There are a lot of, coming into the split Congress here, when you look at the issues that motivate the base on either side, I think you're unlikely to see any movement there because you have a divided Congress. But that, that's the tip of the iceberg. When you go below that, there's so many issues that have a bipartisan support that are impactful to Americans' everyday lives. And those are the types of things that potentially could get done. And again, I how this plays out on the Senate side, I know we'll talk about the House, but for anything to get done, as you need alignment from the Senate, the House, and the White House if it's going to pass legislatively. So again, I remain optimistic that we'll be able to have an open door, communicate key policy issues with both sides of the aisle, both chambers, and work towards issues that accelerate patient access to innovative technologies and work in a bipartisan fashion.
So let me ask that question slightly differently, and then Mark, get your perspective, and then Greg, have you weigh in, which is that for all the years that I've been covering the industry, Medtech can sometimes be portrayed as kind of the less significant, less well known, however you want to characterize it, in comparison with the pharma industry. I know both, and kudos to both Advamed and MDMA for the great work that both of your organizations do in educating members of Congress on the important issues facing MedTech, especially for those members who may not, for example, have MedTech industries in their districts or states and may not be as familiar with some of the issues. It can be an uphill fight. So when you have a situation like somebody like Senator Burr from North Carolina retiring, and he's been I think it's fair to say, someone who's been very knowledgeable over the years about issues facing MedTech, or when we get to the House, somebody like Congressman Upton. To what extent do you see this as, again, an uphill fight to try to prevent MedTech from being lumped in together with pharma? Mark, you alluded to some of the issues that are likely to come up on the drug front. And again, there have been situations in the past where MedTech has incorrectly been kind of lumped in together with pharma. And again, like I said, kudos to both of you for the educational effort that you do. But to what extent does that kind of start all over again, each election cycle?
Sure. Well, it's a great question. And again, obviously, when you look at the churn that's happening with elections, there are new members coming in, additional education that needs to take place. I think I saw something recently that when you look at just the House of Representatives, I think more than both the half of the Democratic and Republican conferences have served less than 3 terms. And so, again, there's a lot of folks who weren't there from the ACA. But I do think even though the device tax was implemented under, Democrats controlling the House, the Senate, and the White House, as Greg alluded to, the ultimate repeal happened in a bipartisan fashion, and that didn't happen overnight. That was a 10-year campaign we waged from the moment that the device tax was mentioned. It was bad policy of educating policies, not only about the impact, but again, who our industry is. And I think there are a lot of districts that maybe they weren't as prolific as the Bay Area or Minneapolis or Boston, but they do have a lot of medtech companies, or they have contract manufacturers, or they had clinical trials going on in their districts. And so that 10-year campaign allowed a lot of education about the impact of our industry. And I like to say we're the triple threat. We're small business, we're job creators, we're improving patient care. You know, there are 80% of the companies have fewer than 50 employees, 98% have fewer than 500. So it's unlike the pharmaceutical industry, which is highly consolidated and driven by large multinationals. This innovation is driven by small businesses. So I think that's a differentiator we've been working at. And I know Advamed and others continue to educate with new members coming in. That's important about how we're different as kind of an ecosystem. And then also when you just break it down to a lot of the focus has been on, you know, pricing of of drugs. And again, I use the example of a drug-eluting stent. When it came to the market, I think it was about $3,500. Now it's around $1,200. So you have, with most medtech, you have additional features, functionality, less invasive, so better outcomes, better utilization, and a decreased price. So it works more like traditional technology, where those dynamics aren't always in place in the pharmaceutical space. So I think it's just this constant, perpetual education, providing the real world examples. We're seeing this even now on supply chain. Some of the efforts to deal with, you know, APIs and reliance on APIs for drugs, you know, heavily sourced in China or India, and trying to crosswalk requirements for devices. And as you can imagine, you know, a drug with 5 or 6 handful of ingredients in a molecule is much different than a piece of capital equipment with, you know, thousands and thousands of components. And so, again, part of our job is to educate about the industry, the differences in the marketplace, but also recognizing that adding, I always say, and devices are 2 of the most dangerous words in Washington, because they're doing something for pharma, they add that in. So it's just constant education about the differences, and that a solution from pharma doesn't mean it's going to map to devices, and that just takes time. But again, folks like Dr. Cassidy and others roll up their sleeve, understand the nuances amongst the industries, and you know, have shown to be very thoughtful when they before they go forward with anything that would be prescriptive through legislation.
Greg, let me have you chime in on that question. And also, just when you look at the change in leadership on the HELP committee, do you see any difference in terms of priorities going forward?
Yeah, I do. I think there's no question it's a loss. I mean, in many respects, Senator Burr was instrumental and widely regarded as an oracle of FDA, really prided himself into quite a good effect of his ability to understand that regulatory side of what we do. And it was evident in every meeting that we had with him. So it's a loss. I mean, but I am encouraged. I do think Senator Sanders will also look and spend a lot of time on education, if you have been following him in the press. So there will be an education component. Senator Cassidy has a great staff director coming on, we know well, and that'll bode positively for us. I think what you're seeing here too is a number of vectors that intersect that we at Advamed and MDMA need to understand and manage, right? It's not as linear as some would like it to be. And some of that is, we call it Operation Fresh Faces, right? There's an education and awareness in a town where there's a surplus of information and a deficit of attention. We sort of account for that, and we build it into our models and how we head to the hill. The other is what Mark alluded to, is real world examples. That's to our benefit. We can really draw on those in a very clear, defined way. I think also that there's a misunderstanding to some extent among staffers who are not on these committees. That's the good news. We have sophisticated policy apparatus among the committees. But then there's a misconception. We've actually done some research on this, where congressional staff tend to look at MedTech first as manufacturers and not as innovators. Mm-hmm. If you see it as manufacturers, you tend to look at it as, you know, factory, this not in the healthcare ecosystem, which is where we are firmly parked and planted. So I think we have a challenge there. I think it's beneath the surface, but I think we have a challenge there as advocates to make sure that staff understand that. And I'll put a plug in for associations. I think if you look at the market climate that we're in as an industry, there's a greater push and a need for trade associations such as MDMA and Advamed to come in and speak on behalf of the entire industry. I mean, 190,000 plus device types that FDA regulates, and for us to come in and say, look, if you want a pinch point for where the industry is, we need to be balanced brokers of that, and I think we do it quite well.
Thanks for listening so far. This interview will continue after this short message. Market Pathways is the #1 publication that covers the people, challenges, and opportunities impacting the global medical device regulatory, reimbursement, and policy spheres. MyStrategist.com is your digital home to access all of our coverage and read the latest issue of Market Pathways. Your support is valuable and makes us better. Please remember to leave a review and rate Market Pathways on Apple Podcasts or wherever you happen to listen.
And I have to say, again, not to throw in a shameless plug for both MDMA and Advamed, but I think one of the biggest changes that I've seen over the 2 decades plus that I've covered the industry is that this kind of education of legislators, both members and staff, has really been effective in making that change, in portraying our industry as one that drives innovation, not just one that produces healthcare widgets, if you will. And I think that's something that, again, I recognize that's in consistently uphill fight every 2 years, but I think it's a big change in the reactions that I've seen to the industry on the part of legislators generally. So with that, Dave, let me turn it over to you to shift over to the House.
Sure, yeah, and I think we could maybe, some of these broader issues probably, impact on both chambers when it comes to how the associations are dealing with the lawmakers. I mean, obviously the key issue in the House is, change of party power and with committees, et cetera. And, a big expectation I'd probably say there is, are we going to have a little bit more investigative scrutiny of the administration, the agencies? Is that something you see as an important from a MedTech perspective in terms of either impacting progress, let's say FDA, CMS, or having a positive oversight role, or, what on that side of things in the House, is that something that catches your attention in terms of this shift between now the White House and the House are in different political perspectives? Maybe I don't know who wants to jump in on that first. Maybe Mark.
Sure. Again, I think obviously the key issue, particularly with a majority that looks to be about 4 votes in the House, whether that's a governing majority, I think is an open question right now. And so therefore oversight certainly falls within the Republican control. And, I think at this point it's, there are probably a couple of different factions with the Republican conference. There are those that kind of want, the Hunter Biden, kind of Anthony Fauci banging that drum. But there are others who want to take on the more kind of traditional oversight of looking, were there areas where the CDC or other agencies didn't meet expectations, and dealing with immigration and, the withdrawal of Afghanistan. So there are a number of, I think, ripe oversight targets that kind of good government, good governance would fall into. I think at this point, a lot of that will obviously be driven by the committee chairs. I think the early, signals from some were that, Hunter Biden was, but whether that's, there are a number of folks who said that's one piece of a small, one small piece of a larger pie here. And so again, I think from industry's perspective, oversight on both sides, ensuring that government agency and others are operating efficiently, effectively, that helps drive accountability, transparency. I hope it doesn't, serve as a distraction, but simply as an opportunity to learn. And so again, from that standpoint, I think we'll just have to see the focus, the attention. I think one area that, we're hearing a lot from our members, we've communicated this to the agency and seems to be a bipartisan interest, is just and this is something not unique to the federal government, but to industry as well, but the whole dynamic of what does the workforce look like, and, that hybrid work model, because, right now, as you all know, it's been public that FDA is operating under a pilot that was supposed to be through October that's been extended, in which I believe all reviewers have given the opportunity to work remotely. We're expecting additional updates on that soon. The chatter we're hearing is that potentially all the reviewers would be able to allowed to work remotely 100% of the time. And that's just I think something that, as you look at a number of retirements coming on from, people who've hit their retirement benefits at FDA, but stayed on through the public health emergency for the sense of purpose, I think you're going to see a bolus of retirements towards the end of this year into next year. And then with the infusion of new capital through the user fee program, hundreds of new people brought in. And I just can't get my arms around how, if you have hundreds of new people who've never seen a 510K or a PMA, how they're going to, be able to kind of get up to speed without that in-person mentorship. So I'm not suggesting that everybody has to come back to White Oak 5 days a week, but there's got to be some mechanism here, some sort of hybrid play, so that, that helps bring these reviewers on board. And then, for our companies, small, medium, and large, if you have a critical product that's complex, you usually want to go to White Oak and have that pre-sub or have a face-to-face to meet the players and look at the technology and understand. And, that's something where, our strong hope, desire, expectation is that resumes sometime in 2023, because I think there's no substitute in some instances. Certainly Zoom can work as a replacement for, I'll call them the commodity meetings, where it's just kind of, administrative back and forth. But when there are some substantive issues that need to be addressed, those face-to-face are critical. So I think these are some of the areas. And again, I don't think that's a Republican or Democratic position. I think that's something that, and it's not unique to FDA. This is something that all agencies are dealing with, that industry is dealing with. It's just kind of find that kind of magic spot in the middle, so that there's flexibility, so you can attract the best and brightest, but it doesn't, there's also no substitute in many instances for those face-to-face interactions, and particularly, again, onboarding new team members.
And that's an area where it sounds like, oversight of the agencies of FDA, keeping a close watch on that type of personnel, but with budgetary impacted issue is an important. You could see where that.
I could just say, I think folks are going to ask how agencies are planning, just like companies, as we emerge out of this pandemic. No one expects it to be a light switch, but what's the glide path to, and again, I'm not saying we go back to where we were in 2019, but if you're telling me that FDA is going to be completely virtual workforce in perpetuity, I can tell you right now, that's not going to work either.
Hey,
Yeah,
go ahead.
That's a great point, Mark. I'll say more about that in a second. I think it's important for specifically in the House to understand the atmospherics. I mean, in many respects, these next 2 years, the 118th will be a rehearsal for 2024. It's true in the Senate. I think it'll be even more true in the House, and that's inescapable as far as I can tell. But understanding that, this country was founded on incrementalism, and that's what the founders intended with respect to Congress. And I think what that also signals, and I was encouraged by Leader McCarthy in saying, we're going to have a return to regular order. Now, I worked for a House Majority Leader. We said that too. This was post Gingrich, but I think they're going to make a good faith effort on that. And that bodes well for the device industry. And here's why. First of all, we can make the steady case as we have on payment reform through these committees, and really put the pressure on the agencies to do the right thing with respect to those initiatives we feel would advance innovation. There's also the counter push, though, that'll come from Republicans. I think there's an anti-corporate welfare sentiment among House Republicans right now. I think we as an industry might get thrown into that. We have to be mindful of it. We have to manage it. I think you're going to see a very activist group of folks at the agency level. So they'll feel like with the incrementalist approach in the Congress, that maybe in the final 2 years of a Biden White House, that they need to be doing more at the agency level. That could be challenging. I can give you a few examples of that. And then finally, something the House Republicans will be watching closely, and one thing that we're sleeping with one eye open is, what's the practical implementation of MDUFA 5? How do you introduce, and with teeth, the accountability provisions? They have to be there, and we have to see the progress that you can feel and touch. And you have to ask questions at a practical level. Are you at White Oak? Are you reviewing these devices, working with the companies? Because look, this is an industry that's only growing. This is, this is addition, not subtraction, and not arrested development on any level. So those are the points that we'll be elevating to Chairman McMorris Rogers, Chairwoman, and others. So.
Can you talk about some of the examples, Greg, that you're thinking of, both from when you're talking about the your point about there may be a kind of sentiment against kind of corporate welfare, as well as some of the other examples that you alluded to?
I think there's some vectors that that move into that don't fit neatly into corporate welfare, but there's an anti-woke January 6th. Hey, and there's a bad taste in the mouths of you cut out over 100 House Republicans in terms of giving. They haven't forgotten that. I'm not saying anyone did anything wrong. We suspended PAC giving at the trade association. We established PAC principles in the wake of that. Our members wanted it, and we certainly saw the need of it. But that still sort of exists in the minds of some of the Republicans, for right or for wrong. But then also in terms of legislative, we have a huge environmental challenge coming with sterilization of medical devices. And not only ETO, ethylene oxide, which is the chemical used for that, but then also the question of PFAS. A lot of our member companies use the safe version of PFAS in the device manufacturing. You're seeing a lot of this crop up at the state level, but it certainly is active at the federal level. I don't think that goes away anytime soon.
I think it would be great, with that. I mean, get maybe to some legislative priorities and sort of how that's going to shake out. Or, obviously, some of the sterilization issue you mentioned is one, but I think we have two, obviously things to look at. I mean, next month in December, before the new Congress takes control, there's going to be an end of year legislation that, and to fund the federal government, and that opens up some opportunities. I know, various riders from the FDA user fee bills were, taken out and maybe up for grabs during that session. And then, of course, once the new Congress takes control, and we have a divided government, what's possible. And I'm curious, like, how you guys are, what each of you may see as, doable things, both in the very near term, before the end of the year, and then, once there is more of that, a division going on. Any sort of first line takes there, Mark? I don't know if you want to jump in.
Sure, happy to. And before I'd just echo what Greg said on some of the PFAS and ETO, and importantly, there you don't need let Congress to do anything. And again, I think with the narrow margins up on the Hill, most feel like the agencies under Democratic control could be more robust and vigorous on regulations they issue, enforcement, et cetera. So again, those are critical issues that I think we all need to remain vigilant on. When we look at the the lame duck, I think obviously the government funding is the kind of the engine to drive others across the finish line here. With Senator Shelby chairing the appropriation, or ranking member of the Appropriations Committee retiring, Senator Leahey, there's a strong appetite to try to do something and not just do a continuing resolution. So I think there's energy around that, and what other elements can be added to. There's ongoing discussion about with Senator Byrd's retirement, the Prevents Act, kind of pandemic preparedness is critically important on the House side. There's mental health provisions that are important from the Energy and Commerce Committee. So we'll see how those two pieces, but there were a number of, I'd call them, the MDUFA riders, that, and again, PDUFA had their own set, so I'm not going to go into all of them, but important riders for Medtech related to, cyber, related to clinical trial diversity, foreign certificates, a number of things that I'd call, that were important. And again, we're either in the House version or the Senate version. Maybe neither version was perfect, but we're polished up a bit. And, I think there was alignment around the four corners, Republicans, Democrats, House, ENC, and HELP prior to the September 30th reauthorization of the UFAs. But because the clock ran out and the dynamics of a clean reauth, those are kind of put aside. But I do feel like there's been a lot of movement there. And so the question becomes, okay, with those kind of smaller riders, are there additional elements like prevents or the mental health that can be added on? And then, the super riders, valid, cosmetic, dietary supplements, obviously I know MDMA, Advamed, our members, done a lot of work and very supportive of the VAL Act moving forward. And the open question now is there enough time to polish the edges here, because you have different constituencies, the academic medical centers and others who have raised concerns. So I think, we're certainly hopeful and bullish that these things can come together and work on a substantial end of the year package. I think if you talk to Leader McCarthy, kind of quote, cleaning out the barn's a good thing, try to get as much done as possible. But we are also, working under limited time where the government funding runs out December 16th. Joe, Congress sometimes is like eighth graders. They give themselves extensions. So does that December 16th turn into December 23rd to do a little bit more work? We'll see. But again, these are, so I'd say just in summary, I think there are a number of smaller FDA provisions that are in a good position to move, and including maybe even, just again, the Medufa ones I mentioned. There are some others, prevents and mental health that are also in play. And again, the super riders would love to see valid move and not have kind of carve outs or exemptions that would kind of undercut the impact of it. But I think I know those are still being discussed, debated, and no final determination has been made up on the Hill.
Right. And I know, and Greg, I know that Advamed has said that they're prioritizing wanting to have the valid diagnostics reforms included, and as well as a few other smaller predetermined changes, I think export certificates.
Right.
Are you optimism in terms of those or any others in terms of that actually coming together? As Mark says, there's this balance of wanting to get out, clean house as he says, but also there's a pretty limited time. So what's your expectation for first of all, this sort of December action?
Yeah.
And does it, does the upcoming split Congress, does that add momentum here because there's, maybe less likely to get majorities going forward or not so much?
Yeah, we've been spending the past few weeks, Dave, trying to handicap that. What does it look like with the House not shifting as much as folks had forecast? And you can shake it out any number of ways. I think just in terms of priorities, we're all in on the riders and valid and PCCP and CFG and I think we have a real opportunity, but it's not without its challenges, as Mark pointed out. And the other things that we're tracking, we're actually going to send a letter to the Hill sort of outlining our priorities pretty soon. Make sure you get a copy of that. But R&D expensing is important. That's part of a bigger, a lot of industries care about R&D expensing and some other provisions. Are we hopeful? I mean, this omnibus is getting real heavy, Mark, as you know. So so there'll be a lot of challenges, but I do think the appetite is there. I think with Senator Burr's leadership, when you look at a McConnell and a Schumer, they'll look to the Health Committee leads and frankly all four corners at the committee level for direction and guidance there. And you're going to need 60 votes in the Senate, and I think this can be a shot in the arm to kind of push it over the finish line. With respect to, real quickly, into 2023, I think pandemic preparedness, even though it's in play for the end of the year and it's a legacy issue for Senator Burr, I think pandemic preparedness is going to be a perennial topic for us as an industry, at least for the foreseeable future. I don't know, Mark, if you agree. I think supply resiliency beyond shortages. I think just the supply network global is something that we'll want to keep front and center in the Congress. I think if you look at chips, semiconductor chips, legacy, and we've got a good opportunity with the $52 billion that was enacted. So we'll have some work to do there. Packaging, trips. There are a number of issues that sort of extend beyond its own gravitational pull, but there are satellites or antenna, whatever analogy you want to use, visual you want to use, that we'll be tracking. I think we have an opportunity to really draw attention to it in the name of patient care and in the name of patient access, which a lot of the incoming freshmen and sophomores will want to care about. So
I would just add, and I agree with what Greg said. Also, too, we haven't talked a lot, but on the payment side, there are cuts set to take place, hit physicians coming up.
Right.
And again, I think there's expectation that those cuts will be dampened. Also, PAMA cuts to diagnostics. So there are a number of cuts kind of on the horizon if Congress doesn't act. I think there's interest to address those. Now, the magnitude and the duration of addressing those, I think those are all open questions because they all come, with costs associated with them. I know something else that we're working on closely with Advamed and others too is just ongoing progress on on TSET. It started with MSIT, now this transitional coverage, and there is overwhelming bipartisan support. A letter with 16 senators, 8 Democrats, 8 Republicans went to CMS administrator, same type of bipartisan support on the House. And so again, whether it takes the form in some sort of Cures 2.0 package and this year into next year, maybe not as prescriptive, but maybe some timelines on when they expect CMS to move. As it stands right now, we expect a proposed rule out from CMS has said no later than April of 2023. So these are things, again, that are priorities, I know, for the industry, for the associations. Some will take the form of legislation, some will take the form of regulation, and often the two go hand in hand because more legislative interest can also compel the regulatory process to move a little bit more expeditiously and in a more targeted manner. So again, there's just, as Greg said, even though folks are saying, oh, divided Congress, how much can really get done? There's a tremendous amount of activity going on in Washington now that will continue for the next 2 years, legislatively, administratively. So that's why it is so critically important for, companies to remain vigilant, because, it's when you take your eye off the ball, that's exactly when things can kind of slip through and cause, real impact downstream.
So that's a great segue, Mark, into the last area that I wanted to get into, which is as we look at the prospects for 2023 in the reimbursement payment reform area, generally speaking. Let me kind of lump two issues together and get both of your perspectives. One is TSET, and specifically whether you think this can be accomplished by executive action as opposed to the need for legislation. And secondarily, I think the broad consensus that I get from going out and talking to companies is that with the progress that's been made over the past decade or so during Jeff Shuren's tenure heading CDRH, that FDA has improved significantly. And therefore regulatory, which previously was the primary concern for many medical device companies, has now been replaced by reimbursement. And so the issue is, I think also there's a consensus that CMS, again, not in any way trying to disparage the agency, but clearly lacks the resources that FDA has. And again, we talked a little bit about MDUFA. And one of the questions that I get most often is whether you think we'll see some kind of legislative initiative to boost the resources at CMS, because again, the consensus that I hear from people is that that's what it will take, a la what happened at FDA, perhaps a MDUFA for CMS, so to speak, to really try to get CMS on the same path to progress that we've seen with FDA.
Yeah, I'll start. I don't think you can put the cart before the horse here. I think first we have to understand what is it that CMS is willing to do relative to an accelerated pathway for innovative medical technologies. What's the size and scope? And again, I think to CMS's credit, they recognize and industry recognizes coverage is a key piece of that, but you also have coding and payment that have to be, that three-legged stool to be in place for true patient access. And, we, Advamed and others have been pushing forward for 7-8 years on this kind of dedicated pathway for innovative technologies. And I think it's motherhood and apple pie. I don't think there's anybody on this earth who would say that products that were safe and effective, innovative from FDA, that Medicare beneficiaries shouldn't have, faster access to them. There have been some antagonists, but again, I think there are different motivations that are driving the objections. And candidly, I think some of them are the insurance companies kind of hiding behind groups because they're not keen. They want to collect the premiums, but they want to deliver on the benefits. And so with that kind of framing, I think here again, understanding what, and parallel reviews existed, CED exists. These are all programs that exist, but none of them have kind of met the moment. And so if and when we can ascertain and structure a program for this accelerated access for innovative technologies, and if there's a resource component to it, happy to have that conversation. And I'd say also, though, that, Congress appropriates significant funds. And so, just as in the 21st Century Cures program, the breakthrough program was started, and Congress thought it was critically important, so they put the money forward. So I think it's step one is size and scope of the initiative that we can get alignment on to accelerate this dedicated pathway to accelerate patient access to innovative technologies, then scope out what the resource needs may be. And I think, again, as we move forward here, Congress has certainly shown the ability, the interest to support those efforts to get them started and see where that takes us.
Yeah, I would say the word I want to use here is sequencing, because I feel like, Steve, at the end of the day, we're going to see a rule, that has come a long ways in no small part to our efforts. I don't think it's going to be perfect, Mark. I don't think you do either. But one of the things we're trying to do is help CMS understand the limitations of NCD, CED, local coverage decisions. All serve a unique purpose, but this clear pathway with the transparency, with the predictability is really cutting edge, and CMS can join us in this, and we want to join them and work through it. So, and then to the question about resources, it's a fair one, and one that we've said, look, if you say that you need it and it makes a lot of sense, hey, we'll join you on the Hill in making that case. Let's follow and look at the appropriations process, but it has to occur in I think the sequencing, the timing of that, and the sooner the better. The good news too is that we have a lot of bipartisan interest on the Hill to say, hey, if that's something that, because I've been in this town since '97, where a lot of the agencies say we need to know the congressional intent, and sometimes that's a little bit of a red herring. But if Congress needs to speak more deliberately here, we're following that path as well. Hopefully we don't need it.
Let me ask you both a question, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but one of the issues when you compare the progress at FDA with the situation at CMS can sometimes be characterized as one of more in terms of attitude than one that's limited by legal or executive process. And so, for example, the increased openness that we've seen at FDA and willingness to meet with industry and the expansion of the pre-sub program, I think a lot of people would say this goes beyond simple legislative or rulemaking changes. CMS has historically had at least a public perception among the people that I talk to in industry of not being as open to meeting with industry and working with industry. And again, I'm not talking about where they're specifically limited from conducting certain meetings or having certain discussions. So I'd say, do you hear the same thing from your members? And how does one go about changing an agency's attitude, if you will? Does it take having the leadership of somebody like a Jeff Shuren, to come on and change a culture, or can that be accomplished through either legislative or other means?
I'm happy to start.
Go ahead.
I think, first just look at the structure. I mean, FDA is broad, but then CDRH is dedicated devices. You don't have that same structure at CMS, and so they're dealing with physicians, hospitals, only until the 21st Century Cures, when there was that ombudsman of medical technology set up, did they actually start to, I think, appreciate that we were a constituency that warranted greater attention. And again, in the previous administration, they set up the Office of New Technology. Now I think it's the Office of Coding and Payment. And the intent there, and Jason Bennett's doing a nice job running that in the acting capacity. And he brought in some, medical innovator, basically innovator Sherpas, I believe, or something to that effect, where Jason and his team, James Bailey is on board now, that basically it used to be the silo where you'd have the payment group, you'd have the coding group and the coverage group, and they never talked to one another. So now, at least structurally for the first time, if you're a medtech innovator, you can go to this new office and say, okay, here's my technology. And there's more coordination amongst the silos. Now, that by no means it's perfect, and there certainly are lags, but at least that's something that never existed even 5 years ago. I think the other complex issue here too, with FDA, you had a single point of focus that determined whether your product was legally marketed or not. We could get everything right with CMS, but then if for a new technology that requires a Cat 1 code, you're still dealing with the AMA process for the CPT coding, then RUC to deal with the payment weights. Then you're dealing with the private payers. We're seeing a huge, uptick in Medicare Advantage, where I think over 50% of seniors now receiving it covered through Medicare Advantage, and those are run by private insurance companies. So this is an eight-headed beast here on the reimbursement side, that certainly there are areas we need to make more efficient and effective with CMS, but we continue to engage private payers to make their process more transparent, understandable about what evidence you need to generate for the purposes of a coverage decision. We're working with the AMA to make the CPT and RUC process more transparent. So it's just a much more complex structure dealing with reimbursement than, dealing with the regulatory landscape to get the product legally authorized to sell here in the country, in the US.
Yeah, Steve, I would say those are great points, Mark. On some level, I tell the team, hey, let's be careful not to succumb to the soft expectations of culture, right? And watch yourself on that, because on some level you can't change it. You have to be vigilant. But I mean, we're seeing differences in how we deal with as an industry with FEMA, how we deal with an industry with EPA, with BARDA. Areas where maybe 20 years ago we didn't darken EPA's doors at all on that. So I think they're important questions to ask, and just something that we want to be mindful of, and yet still, ask the questions, be scrutinizing in how we approach it, but then also understand you got to meet them where they are.
No, that's fair. That's fair. Well, we're running up against time, Dave. I'm going to give you the last word.
Yeah, no, I think, well, maybe it was good to end just obviously I've heard obviously it's going to be a challenge with, changeover, as it always is, but, I've heard some optimism. What's your, kind of top hope for 2023 when it comes to, particularly dealing with the new Congress? What's one thing you reasonably expect to maybe either accomplish or come out of the year? I'll just sort of a final word of hope or not hope, however you want to convey it. You want to go, Greg, and then Mark get the last word?
Yeah, I think I am optimistic. I think I think we're going to make strides to advance innovation. I think you're going to see a lot of new entrants into the medtech space, which is, as Mark pointed out, you're talking about single device manufacturers. I think that's only good for the ecosystem. So I'm bullish about all that. I think what I would challenge your listeners and readers is to think it may not be all that noticeable in terms of macro optics, but I think those incremental changes are occurring beneath the surface. And when it's all accounted for at the end of 2023, it'll be a good thing.
Yeah, and I guess maybe I'm very optimistic and bullish about the space as well, but kind of here in DC, it's all right, what keeps me up at night? And I think, it is the fact that we've spent a tremendous amount of money over the last couple of years getting us through the pandemic. And if you look historically too, after, large infusions of capital from the federal government, it usually is followed by periods of austerity. And with a divided Congress here and the debt ceiling debate looming likely to hit sometime this summer, I think that's going to be a material moment for all industries. But again, particularly when you look at healthcare spend, if they're looking to trim there, that could obviously have a very material impact on our industry and other sectors in healthcare. So again, this requires us to be vigilant as MDMA, Advamed, working with others to continue to highlight the value proposition of our technologies. Again, when you look at the overall spending in healthcare, chronic disease drives 80% of healthcare spending. And again, you have technologies that can materially improve and address those chronic conditions. And so for us, it's, don't be penny wise, pound foolish. Making investments in medtech actually can help curb the long-term healthcare costs. But again, often in Washington, the long play is not always the one that's executed. And so again, just remaining vigilant, because I do think this is the debt ceiling debate, whenever it occurs next year, is going to be, critically important to ensure that nothing drastic that impacts innovation or patient care.
Well, that's great. Well, I want to thank both Mark and Greg. One of the reasons we did this podcast is because with all of the furor and news about the election, people in the industry sometimes wonder, well, what does it mean for us? And I think that both of you have done a great job at really kind of explaining what the impact on the industry. And again, I think as both of you have pointed out, incrementalism and not having significant changes is not necessarily a bad thing. So if we go into the next year or so and just move ahead kind of on an incremental basis, that seems to be a path that can lead to positive results for the industry. So I want to thank both of you for joining us and thank everyone out there for listening.
Great. Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Dave. Greg, good seeing you.
We hope you enjoyed that episode. Your support is valuable and makes us better. Please remember to leave a review and rate Market Pathways on Apple Podcasts or wherever you happen to listen.